The other day I was thinking back to when Dawn and I were first married, and we didn't have much, but the times seemed so much simpler then. Do you remember when you barely had anything and everything was so simple? I was making about $150 a week at a small church I was preaching at on the weekends while I was at KCC. I also had some other jobs around the campus. I worked in the bookstore and the business office and even managed the mailroom while Dawn was finishing up her last semester of college. And we could finally graduate and walk the line. But the little money that we made paid for our rent and utilities and groceries. And whatever little we had left over, we might be able to see a movie at the theater once a month. So it was but it was so simple, you know. And when we got married, of course, just like probably most of you, generous donors gave us a bunch of stuff. And soon our tiny apartment at KCC was filled with different things, dishes we got from our wedding, a small couch that my grandparents gave to us. Dawn, you'll love this one. Remember our 1980s waterbed? Mom and Dad gave that to me, to us to use. I mean, it was kind of neat. We also drove around in this 1984 Ford LTD. That was our vehicle. Man, oh man, those were the days. Do you remember those days? It was just excellent and awesome, and we loved it. We had each other, and at that time, that's all that mattered, right? I mean, now that's all that matters. So we finally moved into our first full-time ministry over in Salem, Ohio, and I can remember packing up the truck. They sent a bunch of guys down, and they loaded up the smallest box truck you can get from U-Haul, and there was still room left over. That's how little, we had back then. But we didn't have much, but we were happy, and life was so much simpler then. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have an iPad. We didn't have a Blu-ray player. Those things weren't even thought of back then. We didn't even have an MP3 player. What was that, It just seemed so much simpler back then. And so when you're first married, you know how it goes. Like I said, people start giving you stuff, So we went from 1 toaster to 2 toasters to 3 toasters. We had 4 crock pots. We ended up with 4 couches. How did we get all this stuff? People are starting to give us all these things, and we're making decent money now. She's teaching, I'm preaching, or I'm doing youth ministry at the time, and so we've got some money. So we decide that we're going to start buying our own things as well. And we start accumulating all this stuff. You need decorations for the home and Christmas decorations, you put up every year and you throw in the attic, and they sit around until you get them out the next year. We started buying all these different things, DVD players and Christmas decorations and on and on and on. And our lives went from simple to very complicated. From simple to very complicated. We accumulated so much stuff. And of course, the rule in our house is you don't throw anything away. Not my rule. You don't throw anything away, but we accumulated so much stuff that we had to move to a bigger house. We filled that house up, and so what did we do? We built a bigger house to put our stuff in. And I'll never forget, we're loading up the truck to make our move to Barberton and just tossing stuff on this truck. And we rented the biggest U-Haul they had, and it didn't fit on that. We got the next size down, and it didn't even fit. We ended up making 2 trips, 3 trucks, 4 trucks really, to get all our stuff here. And I remember we're packing up all this stuff, and I'm sitting there, Dawn probably remembers, I'm shaking my head in disgust and thinking, how in the world did we accumulate all this stuff? We've never thrown anything away. I don't get it. Remember when life was so simple, so much simpler? And a verse kept popping in my head. A verse from the Bible kept popping in my head. It's written at the top of your message outlines there in your bulletins. This verse kept popping in my head as we're tossing stuff on the truck. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. It says, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it, for he founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters." This verse kept popping in my head. What belongs to the Lord? Yeah, the earth and everything in it. Who belongs to the Lord? We do. The world and all its people, everything belongs to God. And I'm pondering these verses from the Psalms, and I'm asking myself, you know what? Have I really taken care of everything that God's blessed me with? I'm tossing stuff out onto this truck, and I'm thinking, have I really been a good manager of the things that God has given me? And I'm loading stuff on the truck, items that, at the time I really had to have and I had to buy, and so I bought them, and I haven't seen them in 10 years. And I'm throwing them on the truck, and I'm thinking, you know what, maybe I haven't. Maybe I haven't been a good steward of my belongings and possessions. And then you start to read the Bible, Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells this parable. He says, who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? It will be good for that servant, whom the master finds doing so when he returns, to be working when he comes back. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose the servant says to himself, my master's taking a long time in coming, and then he begins to beat the men servants and maid servants, and he begins to eat and drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and an hour he's not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with unbelievers. Then in verse 47, Jesus says, that servant who knows his master's will and does not get ready or does not do what his master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving of punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. From the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. You've been given very little, God trusts you to take care of that. You've been given a lot, God wants you to take care of that. And so, in one of the few instances in the New Testament, Jesus uses this word for manager in verse 42. Jesus uses this word very few times. I think it's only used like maybe a dozen times in the whole New Testament. But Jesus uses this word manager, which comes from the Greek word oikonomos. What's that sound like? Economist. And we get our English word from that word. And an economist is someone who comes up with a plan to manage another person's resources and wealth and finances and that kind of thing. That's what an economist does. But this Greek word literally means household manager. Household manager, or someone who manages the estate of another person. So you kind of get an idea of what's going on here. Jesus is saying that the faithful servant, the faithful manager knows his place. He knows where he stands in life. He understands that God owns everything, and the servant manages what God has entrusted to him. The foolish servant thinks that the estate that he manages for his master actually belongs to him. It's not my master's estate, it's mine. How often do we use that word? It's mine. It belongs to me. I own that. So the foolish servant thinks that way. Good servants don't confuse their role. They understand that everything they have is not theirs, but everything that they have belongs to the owner. They're just managing his affairs. So everything belongs to God. Everything belongs to God. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all its people, all belong to God. God owns everything. We are just the stewards, managers, economists. We are the managers. God owns everything, we own nothing. Our responsibility is to faithfully manage God's resources. So here's what we believe. Write this in your message notes. Everything we are and everything we have belongs to God. It's not mine. I don't own it. You might say it's on loan from God. To me, I think there's some tremendous freedom in this, if you think about it, Instead of holding on to everything so tightly, this is mine and you can't have it. Instead of holding on to it because it's mine, I can hold on to everything kind of loosely and let God manage it, let God take care of it, because it's His. He's the one who gives freely. He's the one who also takes away. He takes freely. I don't have the pressure and burden to get this or give that, because it's not mine to get or give. It's the Lord's. He can bless it. He can multiply it. He can distribute it, or He can take it away. Just like that. It's up to Him, not me. It's up to Him, not me. I got to be a good manager. The other word we get from this Greek word oikonomos is stewardship. Now, typically when you talk about stewardship, people think money, and now's the time to kind of doze off and, tune out and maybe take a long coffee break or bathroom break and not, forget what the preacher's saying. We're going to get to that, but stewardship is more than just money. It's important that we look at that, but stewardship's a lot more than money. And so I want to look at, if I believe everything I am and everything I have belong to God, then what does that mean for my daily life? What implications does this have? Like a good preacher that I am, I've given you 3 points. 3 points, that's it. So write this in your notes. Point number 1 is this. If everything I am and everything I have belongs to God, that means my time belongs to God. I'm hoping to liberate a lot of you today, even including me. How many times have you done something and you look back and you go, wow, man, that was just a waste of time? Been there? Oh, yeah. A failed project, a worthless class, an unsuccessful shopping trip, a dumb movie. Oh, I got a story for you there. Have you seen the movie Napoleon Dynamite? If you haven't, don't. The credits roll at the end of the movie, and I said out loud for all to hear, well, there's 2 hours I'll never get back. You know what the stupid thing is? I ran out and bought the movie, and we've watched it a few times as a family. What a waste of time it is. You look back and you go, man, these are time wasters. My time belongs to God. I should be doing something better with my time. The Apostle Paul writes in Colossians chapter 3. He says, whatever you do, do it or work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Now, those verses sting a little bit. They sting. Because I look at some of the things I do and wasting time, and I think, wow, I don't know how God was glorified in that, really. Sitting around watching TV all day long, jumping on Facebook in the middle of the workday, leveling up on Candy Crush. Guilty. All these time wasters that we have, and how can we sit back and go, yeah, man, that glorified God. I'm the leader of all my friends on Candy Crush, and yeah, God must be going, way to go, dude. No, He's not. He's going, man, you wasted your time. What are you thinking, man? My time belongs to God. It's not my time. It's time that God has given to me in order to work for the inheritance that will be given to me when my time on earth is done. We'll have to give an account for how we spend our time. It is the Lord Christ that we are serving, not just an hour here on Sunday mornings, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's every day of the week that we're serving God. We may think that we work for our boss, or we work for the company, or we work for our wife at home. Not really. Paul says whatever we do, we need to do it as we're working for the Lord. So we work for God. We work for God. My time is His. Are we being a good steward of what God has given us when it comes to our time? This means that we should give God our best time and effort. We should give God our time to help become better disciples, followers of Jesus Christ, learners of Jesus Christ. And we need to spend more time in Bible study, more time in prayer, more time fasting, more time worshiping Him. We need to give God our time to help grow His church, to bring people to know Jesus. We need to give our time by helping others. We need to be better stewards of the time that God has allotted to us here on this earth. I'm guilty. I'm preaching to me as much as you. Here's the second point. My talent belongs to God. My talent belongs to God. I don't know if you're like I am. I've spent a lot of my life trying to figure out what exactly my talent is. I'll just scratch my head and say, okay, Lord, what's the gift? What am I good at? I'm one of those people about whom you say, he's a jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah. Maybe you're like that. You have all these things you can do. I'm good at certain things. I can sing. I can play hacky sack. I can play the trumpet. I can fix a car. I can fix an appliance. I can do some work around the house. I can cook. I can do a few stupid human tricks that I won't go into here. But all for what? The question has always been, how can I use these things for God? I don't see too many churches looking for hacky sack ministries. Who wants a stupid human trick ministry in their church? You don't see that. It's not very called upon. Peter tells us in 1 Peter 4:10, he says, each one of you should use whatever gift he has received to serve others. You see that? What gift have you received? And are you using it to serve others? Faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. I believe God gave me a gift and a passion, talents at an early age. I believe He gave me the gift of leadership, and He gave me a passion for His church, to see His church grow and become vibrant. So I was, from an early age, looking for ways to make the church better and to help it grow. And I was always trying to gather people around me to do such things. What can we do to make this better? And that kind of thing. It's no wonder I became a minister, It just makes sense. And the question is, what talent has God given you? What passions ignite your soul that you say, man, I love that, and I want to do that. I want to make it a better place for other people. God, get this, God did not give you these talents and these passions so that you could be blessed. He didn't give us these talents to say, so that you become an all-star or a rock star or anything like that. He gave us these talents and passions so that we could bless others. 1 Peter 4:10 said, serve others. And I try to realize that throughout my life. Just last week, we talked about compassion last week, and I'll tell you how it plays out. It's crazy. But my brother calls me up Sunday, and he says, hey, I need your help. Can you help me with my truck? Well, I can fix cars. So I went over to his house, and we fixed his car, and his truck's back on the road. Because God gave me the ability to do that kind of thing. I got to serve someone else. I can make people laugh with my stupid human tricks. It's crazy. I guess I like to be laughed at. I don't know. I can make friends in hacky sack circles. That's how I made friends when I got to KCC. I just started hacky sacking with a bunch of guys, and it was great. I can do these things. I can help lead a church to grow and become vibrant because of the gifts and talents and passions that God has given me. So I want you to dream a little bit here. What talents has God blessed you with? And how can you use them to serve other people, to grow God's church? How can you use them to bless other people and to take the spotlight from you to them? What are your talents? Because they belong to God anyway. Here's the last point. My treasure belongs to God. My treasure belongs to God. Now, here's where we get into money. You can't talk about stewardship without talking about money. So I want to look at Mark chapter 12. You probably know the story really well, and it's an opportunity for Jesus to teach his disciples what's going on, and it's kind of an intimate moment, in your face kind of thing. So in Mark chapter 12, starting in verse 41, here's what's happening. Jesus, he sits down opposite the place where the offerings are being put in, and he watches the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came, and she put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a fraction of a penny. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. and all the others, they all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. And I look at this widow and I think, you know what? She probably had Psalm 24, 1 and 2 memorized. She knew that everything belongs to God anyway. And she knew that her small offering, her giving all she had, it wasn't to impress others. She knew that it was to be used in the temple where God's work was being done. She knew the money she was giving went to see other people's lives transformed for God. And she gave all she had because she loved God. She gave all she had because she loved God. It wasn't about her. It was about God. And so that's why we give here. We know, we give because God's work is being done at First Church. We give because we know that ultimately the money that we give to His church goes toward the work of His ministry, goes toward the transformation of people's lives for Jesus Christ. And we give because we love God. We love Jesus. And because He loves us. That's why we give. So we believe a tithe is the least we can do for God. What's a tithe? 10%. It's hard for us to say, isn't it? 10%. 10% of our income. That's the least we can do. It's interesting what Jesus says in Matthew 23:23. He tells the Pharisees, and He's mad at them. And He says this, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth, 10%, of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness." And what does Jesus says? You should have practiced the latter, this justice, mercy, and faithfulness, without what? What's the former? Their 10%. Their tithe. You should do both. Jesus, remember, He said, I didn't come to abolish the law. I didn't come to do away with the law, but I came to fulfill it. Jesus wasn't doing away with a tithe here. He was saying, you know what? You guys, you're forgetting the important things, and we believe that faithfulness and justice and love and all that's important. But today, I think we've swung the pendulum in that direction. We've forgotten the former, the tithe. We have forgotten what God, I'll say it, requires. A tithe, 10% of our income. Maybe you could picture it this way. Would you give me $1 if I gave you 10? Would you give me $100 if I gave you 1,000? See where I'm going? It's all God's anyway. He owns it. It's His. So why are we holding back? Malachi 3:10. Malachi 3:10. I use this verse a lot. It shows up during our offering time sometimes. Malachi, and this is God speaking. He says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. The whole tithe, that there may be food in my house. And then He says what? Test me in this. Test me in this, God says. And see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have room enough for it. Just as the tithe went to pay for the priest's living and the temple duties and the ministries in the Old Testament, your tithe today goes to pay my salary and the church duties and ministries of our church. It's the same thing. Nothing's changed except how the Holy Spirit and Jesus interact and move in our lives. And so some of you are holding back. You're holding back. You're not bringing the whole tithe, the 10%. You're holding back, and you're wondering, why is my life in turmoil? I don't understand. Why can't I make ends meet? I don't get it. You're wondering why you get to the end of the month and you go, well, there's no money left. There's more month left at the end of your money. You're going, I don't understand, because you're holding back. You're not bringing the whole tithe into his storehouse. And so God says, test me in this. I challenge you to test him in this. Bring the whole tithe, 10%. Now, here's what it belongs to him anyway. It's not my money. I'm a steward of what he's given me. It belongs to him anyway. I'm just giving back what he rightfully owns. Here's the thing. We hardly ever read the rest of what God says about tithing here in Malachi. Let's take a look. Verse 11. God says, I will prevent pests from devouring your crops, and the vines in the fields will not cast their fruit. He says, then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land, says the Lord Almighty. What's God saying? He's saying tithe, bring your 10%, bring your whole 10% into the storehouse, into the church, and I will take care of you. Tithe, and I will bless you. Be a good steward of what I've entrusted into your care, and you're going to be okay. Test me in this. Those are words from God, and I dare you, test him and see what happens. Our treasure, of course, means not just our money, but our possessions as well. And real quick, the big question is, how can I use what God has given me for him? How can I use my house? Maybe I can have a small group there meeting for Bible study. How can I use my car? Maybe I can pick up my neighbors and bring them to church with me. I'm working on my neighbors, by the way. They said they'd be here. They're not here today. But I'm working on them. They're this close. I'm going to go next door and drag them out of the house and throw them in my car, I think, one Sunday. How can I use these things for God? They're his anyway. They belong to him. My treasure is his. How can I use it for God? It's all his. I look at the stuff that I've accumulated all these years. 17 years we've been married. Holy mackerel. We've accumulated a lot of stuff. My house is full. My garage is full. I thank God that we don't have to rent a storage unit for the overflow. I often long to go back to those simpler times when we had very little. But you know what? Here's what's interesting. I don't own anything more now than I did back then. Yeah, I've got more stuff, but I don't own it anyway. It's God's. He's just given me more responsibility. He's given me more responsibility. And with more responsibility comes greater accountability. So someday I'm going to have to answer. What'd you do with the stuff I gave you? What'd you do with your time, Jeremy? What'd you do with your talents, Jeremy? What did you do with your treasures, Jeremy? Did I use them for him? I want to close with this verse from Romans 12:1. Paul writes this. He says, man, I urge you, brothers, I encourage you, I am stressing this as much as I can. In view of God's mercy, think of the mercy that God has given you, the forgiveness you've received because of the blood of Jesus Christ. In view of those mercies, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, your whole life, everything you are. Offer that as a sacrifice to God. All to Jesus I surrender. It's all his. Not mine. This is your spiritual act of worship. In light of all that God has given us, the least we can do is surrender it all to him.